Welcome to the public broadcast from Phone Dynamics. We will go live in about 1 moment. Welcome to the public broadcast from Phone Dynamics. I'm Ivan Throne, founder and chief executive manager of the company. For those of you who don't know me, in Phone Dynamics, the company is a non-state actor. In these early days of the Third World War, we provide full-spectrum dominance consulting to critical continuity industries in non-cooperative arenas. And what this means is we provide the training, the intelligence, the guidance, and above all, the coherent organization that enables individuals, organizations, and institutions to survive, develop momentum, and eventually triumph during these very dangerous times. So today's broadcast topics, we're going to be speaking about the Asia-Pacific theater, some things that we're seeing heating up in that environment. We'll talk a little bit about the movement factions and our work there, what's happening, why the right has been failing for the last couple of generations. In fact, since the end of the Nuremberg trials, they've essentially steamrolled the rest of Western civilization. And then we'll also speak about executive interventions and what will be taking place on the behalf of the company with our investors, our partners, and our clients in the days ahead. Now, the first thing we're going to speak about here with the Asia-Pacific theater has to do with the Russia and North Korea and what's been going on there. Those of you that are not familiar, we will talk just a bit about what we've seen. As many of you know, President Putin from Russia recently made a state visit to North Korea, and they conducted a number of talks. They had some fun dictators driving in cars moments, and they reasserted and redeveloped a formal treaty or pact between the two nation states that has perhaps a legacy of the relationship between the Soviet Union and North Korea. Now, more specifically, why this is interesting is the clause that referred back to the 1961 treaty that pledged military and other assistance by all means at its disposal. Now, North Korea has been providing trainload after trainload of munitions to Russia for use in a special military operation in the Ukraine. By formalizing this, they've also added to this pact an interesting expansion referencing the United Nations Charter and Article 51, which has to do with the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs. Now, this positioning between Russia, North Korea, and then of course China, who's on the North Korean border and in between with Russia, is a, rather than looking at that as an aggressive standpoint towards the West, this is more a consolidation of the multipolar world that they're working to build with BRICS and so on. However, it's worth noting that this is a coalescence and a bringing of North Korea out from the cold, which is not something that's spoken about very much. North Korea is one of the most isolated states in the world. That's changing, and they're coming out. Now, we also have a tripartite there with North Korea, China, and the Russian Federation. All three are nuclear-armed powers, facing off against India locally. Moving forward, also within the Asia-Pacific theater, one of the interesting things is the approval by President Biden a few days ago of a $360 million arms sale to Taiwan. Now, the United States has been providing military training, assistance, equipment, and so on to Taiwan for generations at this point. And China has been ramping up its rhetoric lately. There's rumors supposedly that in June they will make a move for Taiwan. But in the context of Taiwan's recent statements on some significant changes that they're making to their military, to their strategy, and most especially their tactics, following observation of the transformation in warfare in the Ukraine. People often like to talk about how drones are changing the battlefield. Here at the company, we're often inundated, in fact, with videos and feedback from the front in Ukraine. It's a non-cooperative environment, therefore it's of interest to us. The changes in battlefield tactics from the use of drone warfare are more significant than people realize, because we have a very low-cost armament and capability that has the swarm capability as well. We're seeing parallels with this in the Red Sea, where Yemen and the Houthis, or Ansar Allah, which is the appropriate term for them, not the Houthis, it's more of a tribal group, have been bombarding shipping, including attacking U.S., United Kingdom marine assets in the region. Now, generally speaking, you can send 5 or 6 bits of ordnance off, and that costs maybe $50,000 to $100,000 a piece. Just one anti-air missile is millions of dollars, and the ships, not just the expenditure of armaments and the cost to replace them, but the difficulty of rearming is profound. And we're seeing a major trend here where a less overwhelmingly powerful force is able nonetheless to stymie a significant adversary through the use of lower cost swarm tactics. In the Ukraine, that's even driving warfare underground a bit and reverting more to the trench warfare of the First World War. For Taiwan, there's no trenches in the straits. So the adaptation of being more mobile, more dispersed, reliance less on expensive and labor, resource, and effort, and intelligence-intensive weapons, and bringing that granularity down is something to watch. Finally, we're going to move on from here and talk a little bit about the movement factions and what's taking place here on our end in response to many of these changes. Now, the movement of the company will help here to talk a little bit about our structure and how we work. Within the company, we have our officers, myself, we have Risk Division Authority, Mr. Swift and Mr. Barguest, the Hagakure Khan, and placed intelligence assets that we've trained over many, many years. Subsequently, we have the executive cadre, and these are owner-operators of businesses within these critical continuity industries. Transportation, energy, was usually typically oil and gas, armaments, agriculture, and so on. Some question on GAD came in today. What about logging? What about mining? And we're also in those industries as well. That's part of our responsibility to ensure that the continuity of critical industries is maintained through direct relationships, training, and emplacement of owner-operators. Now, last broadcast on the 14th, we talked a little bit about Project Silver Talent, which is specifically the identification, training, and emplacement of owner-operators within companies that our partners acquire. So that work is continuing, and that's the primary function of the executive cadre. Now, with the movement itself, what we're seeing, and this was discussed also in the last broadcast, is that the organic growth on the ground is producing that coalescence of militants, individuals, and organizations that are not at the level of institutions yet. That's our job. Following January 6th, with that shatter and scatter or decapitation of many of those groups, such as Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, we're seeing that vacuum being filled with groups like Patriot Front and others that are aware of the dangers of amateurish leadership. And we'll talk more about that later on this broadcast. Now, the movement, because of this coalescence, because these groups are coming under the authority of the company and working with us in fealty, And for fealty, a very important definition there. We don't use the old medieval sense of fealty as being perhaps a slavish sort of following. It's a two-way street of loyalty, duty, obligation. Now, these groups that come under us, it's happening very quickly, in part because the times are simply causing this, and as well, the company provides that authority. We provide the operational expertise and the enterprise experience to avoid the amateurish outcome. Now, in order to facilitate this growth in the movement, we are moving very rapidly towards a more formal organization movement factions. And what this means as a faction, it's simply the term for a regional group under a faction leader who will be a member of the executive cadre. We have 2 of those already established, and we're working on others as they come into being organically on the ground. This is not a proselytizing effort. The company does not, go out and then encourage people to create a faction. They grow into that role once they rise to the level of competence that warrants them being explicitly led. Now, there are other aspects of this organization, but also very importantly, this organic formal growth has resulted in the company commencing production of the faction manual. For those of you who are interested in this, be aware that we are developing formal guidelines written and published internally and available to those leaders. So it's not simply a matter of donning an indicia and then declaring yourself part of the company efforts. There's a very serious process for training militants, bringing them under the standard, and ensuring that they have the correct posture, mindset, and direction to effectively work. We're seeing this primarily in Texas, also in the central Midwest, and we'll be back down in Texas very soon. In fact, tomorrow there's a faction briefing. I'll be on video, but we'll have a number of people, including the movement's financial, will be there to talk about Project Silver Talent, finding those owner-operators, and guiding the movement factions to assist with the preservation and advancement of those critical continuity industries. Now, one of the questions that's interesting to look at is, why is this happening? Why are they turning to firm dynamics? The answer lies in the fact that there are no other contenders. Let's flip the stage a little bit and look at it from the other angle. Let's say you are inside hard right. You look around, you see the destruction of your country, you see the collapse of your culture, the desecration and abandonment of civilization. Where do you turn to if you wish not to be subjugated and you make that decision to step forward? You know you need training. You know you need expertise. You know you cannot afford to make mistakes, because the moment you move, there's a target on your back that does not go away. There are no other contenders in our role. We're explicitly hard right, not idiots who bring enterprise expertise and other competencies to the fore. Now, let's shift here a bit and talk about why this is, why the right fails. There are issues of ego and how that interfaces with what the East often calls the mandate of heaven. The lack of experience we've cited. We'll go into some detail on that. There's a focus on pageantry rather than on execution, and then what we call gamma manipulation here at the company. Now, ego is a very important thing to understand here. And we use this term both deeply and broadly. Ego is not simply awareness of self. It's not only the sense of separateness of self from things. I think, therefore I am. But also, as most people understand the term, that concept of narcissistic unearned champion self-regard. And this ties in very closely to a person's leadership, execution of enterprise stewardship, management of both alliances, managing upwards and managing downwards, and ensuring that there is a coherent adherence to the vision and mission of the organization. And the other thing that's interesting, this is worth thinking about, and something that we are very careful to instill and teach and embed in our investors, our partners, and our clients. The mandate of heaven is not interested in you. And often on the right, when you see someone who has formed a group or become an influencer or starts to rise, you can see within them that almost selfish hope that the mandate of heaven will miraculously come down and lift them. That is not how it works. In order to fully execute and fulfill on your duty of the state, you must be last. And by that I mean not that you artificially humble yourself, but you must come after your mission. You no longer belong to yourself. That is the full commitment. The burnt ship on the shore, the thrown scabbard on the beach. You walk forward with your head straight, your heart settled and decided, with no hesitancy and no backup. Most won't do this. Unfortunately, the natures of men are what they are. And you'll see typically men who will start groups, they think that somehow they will rise or their group will rise or that events will help them. They won't. This is why the company has placed such significant and existential focus on that, what we call mirror posture, that reflects perfectly what comes in. It's not about broadcasting so much. It's not about self-aggrandizement. It's about fulfilling duty that comes with sacred purpose. That is the road to the mandate of heaven, by struggling and suffering and climbing and clawing all the way up to that level. The universe does not notice you, neither does the way of heaven. You either adhere to it or you don't. If you wish heaven's mandate, if you want providence behind you, you must be in full accordance with the principles of heaven. And again, not my will, but thine be done. When that is not present, when self-aggrandizement, luxuriation, and adulation, all of those things mitigate against the competence of the ruler, decoheres him, and squanders the capacity of the raw human capital at his disposal. Now, this also is a function of experience, and one of the great differentiators of throne dynamics from other contenders. We are not a party or a church. We're not concerned with matters of policy. We want the lights kept on. We're not worried about a particular hot button issue, such as abortion or gun control. Those are serious matters, and we don't make light of them, but those are not our focus. We don't worry about one denomination over another. We are Christian, but we're not sectarian. That is not the point. We do decry the weakness and the disgusting abrogation of duty on the part of the church, where turn the other cheek becomes try that again. That's been lost today. In the news just yesterday, Archbishop Vigano, who is a highly conservative Christian authority, has been summoned to Rome for an excommunication hearing because of his criticism of the policies of the church. And that's the sort of thing that often hamstrings leaders. Now, our experience at the company and our rightful prerogative comes from this, is in our long enterprise experience. Once you've spent 1 or 2 decades at a Fortune 100 company in a senior role, you understand how successful businesses operate. You understand how leadership, accountability, and credit for your subordinates works. This is something that most people on the right do not have if they are hard right or insurgent. Those who do have this, run the incredible risk of losing all of it if they take the stance that the company does. We have made our decision. We stand by it. It is our decision. That is where our prerogative comes from, and why, while others talk, we act to deliver. We take our capacity, we cohere teams, and we bring competence to the struggle on the age of militants. Often people are asked, Ivan, with your logo. In fact, one writer even reached out, was writing a hit piece on the Tate brothers, and that I've had a relationship with them. So he says, well, it looks like the Nazi eagle, modeled after the Roman aquila. And most nation states in the West have some form of eagle indicia. The United States does, Russia, Poland, Austria, name it, it's there. It's a militant symbol of a free actor who declares their own sovereignty and fights for it. Pageantry, however, is different from posture. And on the right, there's often a unfortunate and ineffective focus on display. You see this often in some of the harsher hard-right movements, where there's an emphasis on uniforms, there's an emphasis on banners, and they make wild pronouncements, they seek controversy, and it's more about notoriety, seeking for that viral spike that somehow brings the mandate of heaven down, instead of the hard professional work of building nations, of building civilizations, of fortifying men and their businesses, and therefore their communities, bringing communities together in concert, not just digital, but physical, industrial, political. Flashpoint Europe, it's precisely what we're doing on the ground there, following the European Parliament elections that went radically for the hard right. We'll be ensuring there at that conference late this year that these new leaders understand how to remove that ego and place a greater vision at the service of their collective assets. Now, project managers have an expression. There are 3 constraints if you want to have something significant achieved. There's time, there's resources, and there's effort. It takes the work it takes. You have the resources you have, and you know how much time you have and don't have. The rest is math. And as a senior project manager for many decades in the financial industry, working on 9-figure projects in a highly regulated environment, dealing with Treasury, dealing with the IRS, dealing with scores of thousands of participants that relied on the accurate and correct, what they're called definitively determinable payouts. You cannot make mistakes, and will be replaced instantly if you are a liability. This experience is something that we bring to the table, and we understand that that competence cannot be substituted for by anything else. And finally, one of the things that we do see, and this is one of the regrettable failings on the right, is that what we call gamma manipulation. For those of you not familiar with the term gamma, comes from Boxday's socio-sexual hierarchy, which is an observation model of behavior in order to predict it. That's not about status or identity. Now, the gamma is typically, these are the weasels, these are the ones they're called secret kings, who believe that inside, they truly are always the winner, even though their company is not welcome, the interactions are unpleasant, and they never obtain the respect that they truly seek. Unfortunately, in times like these, when ambitious men seek to rise, that there is part of the signal. Rather than seeking to achieve, they seek aggrandizement. And they will manipulate men, they will manipulate events, they will manipulate time, resources, and effort for their own benefit, rather than the advancement of the mission and the vision, and higher than that, the sacred purpose that must and depends on them to accord with and be led towards and on the way of heaven, meaning that which is right, that which is just, that which does not negotiate with evil. Now, moving on here, let's talk a little bit about executive interventions. What do we do here with the company? How do we handle, engage, and interact with the leaders of these critical continuity industries that we find? Now, executive interventions, typically it's a crash prevention exercise, where we'll have someone who has a substance abuse problem, or they'll have a mental health issue, or they'll have some other deleterious habit or paradigm that they're about to crash from and refuse to see it, won't accept help or get help for themselves. And an intervention is when friends and family, perhaps co-workers, or the organization that they're a part of will boldly step forward and take this person and force them to see the consensus of the damage and the destruction that they're causing and headed towards. Now, what this often creates is it's a very hostile situation. Generally produces more drama than solution, because it can't succeed unless that person's broken and crushed to the point that they submit to the group consensus. It's ultimately the same process as the struggle session that they use in the Cultural Revolution in China, perhaps today in North Korea or in other countries. That's not the process of the company, and that's not how effective executive interventions work. Now, the company does not work with broken birds. Our clients are not people with significant substance abuse, mental disease or defect, or other inhibitors to enterprise success and achievement. We invert this. We seek those who, with an intervention, are able to break past their limitations of fear. If they challenge the system and break the place where they keep their stuff, that's frightening to them. The weakness that comes, they may lack understanding, they may lack perspective, they may lack certain capacity or training, and they may not have the ability to recognize where things are going because it's just past their ability to actually intake and understand. That's where trust comes in. We do see. We have the information, the intelligence, the methods, and the training. And above all things, we have the purity of heart without ego to speak directly of truth, to show truth, and to throw them the rope, break those locks, and bring the executive to the place where he is able to scale. And that's what we call that positive breakout to scale. Now, the way we achieve this is through a process that we call neurodominance. There's more information on that on the company website. If you're interested in this, you can go and have a look. But neurodominance is a evolutionary process of refining the will, the intelligence, intention, posture of the heart through an extreme and repeated crucible over time. Just as pressure creates a diamond, that's how that works. And we have the experience and the methods over many generations from my family, from my training, from the executives and the cadre, the businesses they've run, understanding of the struggle of the entrepreneur. We know exactly what we're doing. Later this month, we'll be releasing an adaptation of our executive intervention program called Warlord of Heaven to help sharply and directly affect this transformation and intervention for them. Now, moving on here, some questions that have come in from people out there in the movement. The first one was, what near-term considerations should we keep in mind as we hurtle towards World War III? While the act of war itself may be far off, what should we keep in mind in the coming weeks and months? This is an important question, and above all, the thing that we strongly encourage men who are in the tangential arena near the company but are not yet clients or that don't work directly with us, do not adhere to what's called normalcy bias. More colloquially, the expression, the train is fine. You cannot do that. If you are aware that things are tightening, be aware that things will break. As you are aware the war is moving closer, be aware that it is interested in you. Look for things that are fragile. Look for things that are likely to break. Look for things that don't have support. Understand what happens when things like that are impacted or shaken. And then look at the natures of the men responsible for the continuity of those industries, those organizations, those institutions, the people themselves. Now, next question. What effect does the European theater have in our lives currently? What's the same here? What will look different as war grows hot? Europe is in many ways very different from the United States. And it's not just a casual statement. Their history is very different. They have not had the regional, and for the United States, that's a very broad region, stability. The borders are very close. They've constantly fought wars since humans have lived in Europe, where the United States has had many, many generations of internal pacification. Yes, you can bring up the colonization of the Indian lands and so on, but that's not the same thing as formal nation states warring back and forth across a much smaller landmass. So there's a sensitivity there and an aversion to that at the same time, an expectation of it. Which is why in Europe they're much more concerned about the hard right than they are here. It's one thing for the United States government or its officials and bureaucrats to talk about the hard right as being the most dangerous threat to our democracy. But in Europe, they've seen things take sharper and faster turns on both the right and the left with their local militants, as it were. So it's not really so much a matter of difference, it's just a matter of scale. And if you think of that concentric narrowing, and then, of course, the pressure that more quickly builds at an exponential rate. That's one of the differences with Europe, and that's also one of the similarities. Another question is, how to ascertain what is decay and what is targeted malevolence during collapse, and how does it affect response? The first thing to ask yourself is, does it make a difference? It doesn't matter if someone threw the rock at me or the rock fell towards me. The important thing is not to be hit by the rock. And I'm making this on purpose very simple so that you can understand where your priority is. In ninja combat training, the most important thing that we were always taught, instructed, and drilled over and over, do not be where the strike is. Conversely, in hockey, for example, they say you skate to where the puck will be. The ninja learn to not be where things fall. from that standpoint, it truly doesn't matter, because the matter of fact is that men are replaceable. And you need to look, including those who are adversaries and leaders on the other side. Plans rarely survive contact with the enemy. So don't make the mistake of worrying too much about whether it's a conspiracy, whether it's a plot, whether it's malevolent. Yes, you can make the observation, the great replacement, for example. Yes, that's happening on purpose. But that's not the point. The point is what to do about it, how to handle it, how to survive it, and in what manner. Here's a question that came up. Is relocating a good idea? With World War III gathering momentum and the economic stagnation that the West is facing, is moving somewhere else a prudent thing to do? There are many variables at play with this. What principles should govern the foundational aspects of this quandary? Generally speaking, the concept of moving is really a desire to flee rather than face. That's understandable, that's normal, sometimes that's appropriate. If you're a Jew in Poland in 1940, you don't want to be there. But today, with Third World War, especially for those of us in the West, in terms of thinking of getting distant enough so that you're outside the blast zone, so to speak, which is really the question here. Something to think about. What are you when you're there? Even more broadly, why is it outside the blast zone? Because it's not the same as the place that gets blasted. It's not a target. Why? Because it's different. So if you are there, who's the different person? Do you want to be the highly visible, different person who's there as a guest when things get very hostile? It may seem like a short-term prescription, and again, yes, circumstances can sometimes indicate that it's the wise thing to do, but as a reflexive move, no. Generally, that's not a wise thing to do. If you have the resources, you're even more of an attractive target there to be plundered as the wealthy foreigner. So bear in mind, there is no escape. That's why it's called a world war. It's incumbent on you to figure out what you can do, learn what you need to learn. The company value, fuck you, find out. Fuck you, fix it. That's part of your duty and your responsibility, especially as a militant in these very dangerous times. Now, the cadre had a few things to say. They wanted to offer some things, and this one of our executives said, I find that's another problem with the right. They all want to be lone wolves, or the guy who could be a leader is missing that one small thing that they insist on. Our people are also far too quick to flee elsewhere rather than dig in and fight. Purity spirals are one of the primary reasons that we are a company, we're not a party or a church. That gives us the ability to be objective, to be clinical, to be cruel in a very professional and appropriate manner. We weigh resources, we weigh effort, and we weigh time, and we do the math. These things give us the ability to stand in the correct place at the right moment with the right men to consciously work to shape history through the cadre, through the movement and its factions, through the companies that we operate, the jobs that we create, the families we sustain. This is how victory is achieved. This is how your duty of the state is fulfilled. You cannot run and build a parallel economy. It will be smashed. You cannot be a Rambo or a lone hero. That's fantasy. You must work with what you have. You must fight and defend the values that you hold, not apologize for them. and not feel the consequence of failure, because it is war. You may lose. You have to understand that and handle it with competence as a professional. There's no other way. Sometimes it is better to let dynamics play out. Sometimes you may have to act. Hesitation often results from trouble in discerning which path to follow. This again goes back to training, experience, perspective, knowing how things work, being able to see clearly without the filters of policy preferences, of sectarian demands, purity spirals, and dogma. What is? See truth. Always follow it where it leads you in the dark. And then get up and walk to it. There's no other way. Hesitation happens. Hesitation is normal. But you as an individual, man or woman, have the responsibility to decide. And decision comes from the Latin word to cut off, to make another future not possible, to extinguish it. That is how you decide, you choose, by what you will not do. Those of you who have raised the black flag as a militant, who work with us in the movement, will not submit. They will not quit. They will not despair. And above all things, our other company value. No parley and no quarter with evil. You cannot negotiate with it. Finally, the last exhortation from the cadre is join the company. Build a nuanced and sensitive approach to this conundrum. You should be the man of the future that you look to. The company will create this man with you. Once again, what the company does, we're non-state actors. We provide full spectrum dominance, political, economic, military, all of the things that our counsel, our consultation, our guidance, our training delivers to those who have made that decision. And we operate in non-cooperative arenas. And oftentimes, the best response and the only available solution is to break the game. We are a commodity of one. We have no competitors in this space. Our vision is clear, and our movement is forward. We invite you to join the movement. The link is there. And thank you for joining our broadcast today.